So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining this Wellbeing of Women webinar, which is entitled Let's Chat Menopause. We're very excited to be hosting this event, and we're very, very grateful to our two guest speakers for their involvement, and I'll come on to them in a few moments. But I just want to tell you a little bit about Wellbeing of Women. My name's Lesley Regan, and I'm the chair of this women's health charity. We're the only UK charity that's working in women's health right through their life course, literally from adolescent to grave. And we've funded lots of projects recently on the menopause in our research portfolio. But one of the things that we've been doing over the last couple of years since I took over the chair is also changing the focus of what we're doing and really addressing education for women, providing them with really good information so that they can be part of the solution. I think that's really important, and that means also really getting into the advocacy space, which is tricky, and it's quite tricky to get funding for that sort of thing. But my wonderful team at Wellbeing are doing a fantastic job, and we've been running a lot of webinars such as this one, just a short 55 minutes at lunchtime when lots of people who are in the workplace or at school or in education somewhere can join us. And I think that you'll agree that we've had quite an impact. So to talk to our particular topic today, just over a year ago, Wellbeing launched the Menopause Workplace Pledge. And what we did was we asked employers to commit to supporting staff through the menopause and improving the working environment for women, people infected by the menopause. And it's had a lot of traction in the media. And, you know, Naomi, I know that your wonderful book that you did with Davina McCall and her two fantastic documentaries have done so much to raise the profile and get people talking about this very common problem. And I think understanding as well that menopause is an inevitability in most women's lives. So why on earth don't we recognise that and ensure that they're really well prepared to tackle it in whichever way they choose to, and comes back again to giving them the information that they need so that they can make the best decisions for themselves. I'm a great believer in one size never fits all. Everyone's got to have the opportunity to contribute to where they're going. So I was a little bit skeptical at the beginning about the Menopause Workplace Pledge, I will confess now, but I'm extraordinarily pleased to be able to tell you and the audience today that we now have over 1,500 companies. And every time I say a number, it's gone up, and somebody will correct me from later today that it's now 1,600 or perhaps it's 1,700. But we've done an enormous, it's really got some real reach. And as you know, and that's why Katie and Naomi have joined me today, that this week, on the 11th of October, we launched our most recent campaign at Wellbeing of Women called Let's Chat Menopause, and hence the title of this webinar. And this is all about not just information, but normalising conversations about the menopause and breaking down barriers. And the team have produced some fabulous, I think they really are inspiring films with celebrities and menopause activists and advocates such as Penny Lancaster, Carolyn Harris MP, Michelle Griffith-Robinson, Dr. Nigat Arif, who's one of our ambassadors, and Zoe Hardman, all sharing their experiences to encourage others to open up and talk about it. Let's make this a very common everyday chat. And something also that we teach young people to expect later on in life so that they can be prepared. So I'm going to stop there because I really want to hear from our two fabulous speakers today. And I'm going to turn firstly to, I'm going to just quickly introduce them, Naomi and then Katie. Naomi is a GP, but she's got a very good broad base in training. She's got a real specialist interest in women's health and has done for many years now, because she hasn't just done obstetrics and gynecology, she's also done psychiatry and emergency medicine. And I can promise you that if you've done those two, as well as O&G, you're prepared for any event in women's lives. So thank you very much. Now, as a general practitioner, which is what she decided that she would settle on doing, she's really established her interest in the menopause, and I think was recognised it as a really unmet need or a neglected area. And she's a member of the British Menopause Society and an accredited specialist. So you're lucky if you're in her GP practice and you see her. And as I mentioned earlier, she's also co-authored the book Menopausing with Davina McCall, who we're very excited to tell everybody on the platform last week agreed to be one of our ambassadors too. I've promised her it'll be a low time commitment and maximum impact. So I'm delighted that you've joined us, Naomi, and also Katie, who's the founder and the CEO of the Latte Lounge, which you can see on her board there in her background. And this is an online platform for women over the age of 40 years, and it exists to help them in their midlife thrive, not just at home, but in the workplace. And she created the Latte Lounge in 2016, which is what, 6 years ago, isn't it now? After suffering for some years with poorly or misdiagnosed symptoms of the perimenopause. And her Latte Lounge community now supports more than 50,000 women with evidence-based information about women's health. And it's backed up by a medical advisory team. So I could go on and on and on and on, but what I'm going to do now is to turn to Katie and ask her if she will be so kind as to share with us her experience of the menopause and tell us a little bit, or give us a feel for why she's so passionate about raising awareness and supporting other people going through the menopause. Katie, the floor is yours, or the platform is yours, I should say.
Oh, well, firstly, thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you for having me here. I'm obviously very excited to share my story with you all, and I actually hope it will give a lot of people some light bulb moments. So I'm 53 years old now, but if you rewind 10 years to when I was 43, I was a very busy mum, juggling 4 children who at the time were aged 9 to 15. And I was also working for a charity as a communications manager, which was a job I loved. And over the next sort of 4 years, I started to feel a whole host of symptoms which really affected my sort of health and well-being. And the first sort of thing I noticed was I would walk my kids to school and then sort of go straight on to work. And I had this just absolute exhaustion. It wasn't just sort of, oh, I haven't slept, because I wasn't sleeping. I had about 4 hours sleep a night if I was lucky. But it was like walking through sticky treacle. A normal 5-minute school walk felt like I was climbing Mount Everest. I also suffered from brain fog. I'd go into a meeting and I'd be looking at budgets, and it was like reading another language. I also started feeling a lack of joy, really, really low mood, very, very teary. And that wasn't like me. You know, I had a good life, a loving, patient husband, you know, as I said, 4 great kids and a great job. And so it didn't add up to me that I should be depressed. But like women do, I just carried on the best I could, surviving on very little sleep. I then started feeling sort of a lot of sort of heart palpitations and anxiety, which were symptoms I'd never had before. And I just thought, this isn't right. I just was not coping at all. So over the next 4 years, I went back and forward to my GPs, and every time I saw a different doctor, and they prescribed antidepressants. And I was very sort of reluctant to take them, because I just thought, you know, I'm not depressed. I'm a doctor's daughter. I've grown up surrounded by medics. You know, I'm not a hypochondriac. It just doesn't make sense to me. But maybe, you know, I'm just juggling too much. And my doctor said maybe I should consider going part-time, which thankfully I was able to do, because I was working for a mental health charity, ironically, and they didn't want to burden me, and they wanted to care for my mental health. So I went part-time, but I still wasn't feeling right. I actually became a shell of a woman. I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to socialize. I put on an enormous amount of weight. My bones started aching, and I actually started bleeding very heavily. And nobody had asked me about my periods or whether I even was still having them, because I was young. I was 43. Why would they? I was sent to heart specialists. I was sent to a neurologist, perhaps because my biggest fear and what they started thinking about was this early onset dementia, because I just couldn't put 2 and 2 together, and just wasn't myself, and nobody could find anything wrong with me. I eventually quit my job, which I was pretty devastated about, because I felt like a bit of a fraud, and maybe I just wasn't, up for the job, and maybe they would expose me and think, why did we employ her? And the embarrassment factor of not being able to do my job, I quit. And I had, I did have a lovely employer, but the CEO was male and I was too embarrassed to say I wasn't coping. So I just quit. I lay at home every day. I became severely anemic. I couldn't even make my kids a very simple meal or even walk them to school anymore. Eventually, I went crying to my father. My father is a retired breast cancer professor, Professor Michael Baum, and he said to me, Katie, I think this might be your hormones. I know you're only 47, but I want you to go and see a gynecologist who he worked with at UCH. Lovely lady called Melanie Davis, who sat me down and within 10 minutes said, Katie, this is classic signs of perimenopause. Your estrogen levels are on the floor and we can help you. And she explained it and prescribed me hormone replacement therapy. And I was actually in shock. I was kind of very angry that I didn't know, I'd never heard of this word. I was very sort of angry that none of my doctors had put 2 and 2 together. But I was relieved that I wasn't going mad, and there was actually a reason for all these symptoms. So I went home that night, I cried with relief on my bed, and then I turned to Facebook. Now I was following lots of groups about babies and children, but there was no Facebook group at that time, sort of talking 6 years ago about perimenopause or menopause or anything really to do with midlife health. So I set up a group and I called it the Latte Lounge because some of the best conversations I've had with my friends are always in a coffee shop and we put the world to rights, and I wanted it to feel like an actual place to go. And that night I had over 1,000 member requests and I spent the next week trying to approve them all. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm not alone. This isn't just me. This is a problem with thousands of women. And these were women coming from all over the world. These weren't just, I'm London, UK based. These were women in Australia, New Zealand and Spain and France and everywhere. And I thought, because I'm a doctor's daughter, I didn't want them to all come to Facebook and not have anyone support them or inform them or signpost them somewhere. Women are really good at giving well-meaning advice, but sometimes perhaps it can be a bit, dangerous or not quite right. So I put together a medical advisory team and I built a website with 3 key aims to basically, as I've said, support, inform and signpost women. Obviously perimenopause and menopause, but all things women's health, which is a passion of mine because I think, I've just kind of grown up surrounded by doctors and I think I'm a frustrated doctor. I've always been a communicator. I love communicating, but I was rubbish at chemistry. So that's kind of why I do what I do. I've been campaigning now for the last 4 years with the lovely Diane Danzibrink, who set up the Make Menopause Matter campaign, and we've been up and down to Westminster many times, and we are so delighted that through Davina's documentary and so many other passionate campaigners that we're all raising our voices now and things are changing. With the women's health strategy, I'm beyond grateful. So I just, this is why I do what I do. We're running something called the Midlife Festival this week, which is a free online event too, so that we can just, support as many people as we can. And I also, I'm very passionate about supporting women in the workplace. I'm so glad you have this workplace pledge because I left my own job. So I also do a lot of sort of training and events like this for corporates and help write policies to make sure that, no other woman will suffer like I did and thousands of others do, and that we can keep women in their jobs. So I hope I haven't rushed that, but I sort of don't want to take up too much time because obviously Dr. Potter has also got so much to say and help everyone with. But thank you for having me. Oh, you're on mute.
See? Thank you so much for being so candid and so honest with us. And it's lovely to meet Michael Baum's daughter, who I've shared many patients with in the past. So that's great. And I think, everyone on the platform will be really sort of struck by what you were saying about you left your job, you quit your job because you didn't want to be, in quotes, found out or whatever. And, for a young woman like yourself to be feeling, because you're still young, to be feeling that you could be going mad. I mean, what a terrible, terrible feeling. Absolutely shocking. So I'm so glad that you have had treatment and that you found something and that you've actually founded the Latte Lounge. But I suppose for the members who are watching on our platform today, how much, if I was an employer, wouldn't I want someone like Katie on my team? So that's what I think is so sad about women in the menopausal years or the perimenopause when they quit work, that we're losing them at their most experienced, at their most productive. And they're not replaceable. You can replace them with a body with 2 legs and 2 arms, but you can't replace that experience and their ability to mentor others. So I think there's now a really big economic argument. And judging by what's going on in our government this week, we need to we need to ensure that all these women stay in our economy, because they're going to be key to moving forward. So I'm going to ask Naomi if she could help us, and Katie, please chip in if you'd like to. We've got some questions, some general questions, and then we've got quite a lot of questions in the chat. And for anyone who's on the platform, please put your questions in the chat, and we've got 15 minutes at the end. If in the next 15 minutes or so, or 20 minutes or so, we don't actually answer some of the questions that you've got. So really, I'm serious. So Katie and Naomi, I'm happy for you to chip in whenever you want to, because sometimes I think it's really nice to have a doctor's viewpoint and then in quotes a patient or a woman's viewpoint about the same topic. So enough of me. Naomi, if I may, what is the menopause?
So the definition of the menopause is you are in the menopause 12 months after your last period. But in reality, it's when your ovaries stop working. So rather than them producing an egg every month and producing the hormones that are associated with that, they just stop, they stop. And but as well as losing your periods, you might also have symptoms associated. And in fact, it's those symptoms that are associated with it from after the menopause, but in the time before the menopause, in the perimenopause, that can be the most distressing or disturbing for a woman experiencing it.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, isn't it, to emphasize that the symptoms come from estrogen deficiency, and that may be very different for different women. So although the blood tests may say one thing, if you, for example, Naomi, your normal situation, if you've got an estrogen level of X and it goes down to X minus 2, then you may have horrible symptoms, whereas Katie might have X minus 2 as her figure and not be troubled at all. So I think it's a very individual thing. And there's quite a few questions here about blood tests and things. And I mean, as a clinician who sits in a specialist clinic, I have to say that often when I see ladies, they've already had investigations done by somebody else. But I'm a little bit skeptical about the results sometimes, because if she comes to me with classic perimenopausal symptoms, I don't really mind what her blood tests tell me, because if she's got no other risk factors for why she shouldn't have some hormone replacement therapy, and that's the option she would like, because I'm not going to force it on anyone, then I would be very keen to let her have a trial of that. Not let her have, encourage her to try it. And I think then sometimes we can be a little bit too hidebound by what the numbers are on the laboratory test results. So that's interesting. So we've heard from some very classical symptoms from Katie earlier, but what would you summarize, Naomi, as the most common symptoms? What would you in your GP practice hear most frequently?
So I think, the classic symptoms are hot flushes and night sweats and periods changing and then stopping. But because they're the most recognised ones, they don't tend to be the ones that need a diagnosis. It tends to be the ones that are perhaps less well known, but not necessarily less common. So I suppose that the symptoms that I find the patients coming to me with that they don't necessarily know is the perimenopause, but is the most common, is the emotional ones. So it's the anxiety, the low mood, the brain fog, difficulty sleeping, and the not feeling like myself. I think not feeling like myself is probably one of the worst symptoms, because women don't feel like they're ever going to get themselves back again. I mean, there's a whole host of symptoms because you have estrogen everywhere, and you have receptors everywhere, from literally from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. But I think those are the ones that are probably common but less recognized. And then there's the less common ones that we still see lots of, the tinnitus, dry eyes, dry mouth, burning tongue, palpitations, and the urinary symptoms. A lot of women saying, I get my key in the front door and I can't quite get to the toilet in time, or I know it's going to be a rush and I can't do anything until I've been to the toilet, getting up in the night, needing a wee. The vaginal symptoms, libido, joint pains. I mean, there's over 60 of them, isn't there? And it changes. As well as it being different from person to person, it's also different over time within that person. And I think that's another thing that makes it quite tricky, is that you might have symptoms for a couple of months and even debilitating symptoms, and then you can wake up one morning and feel absolutely fine. And then that makes you question whether you've really experienced those over the previous few months. And it can be really confusing.
And actually, Naomi, you make a good point. But first of all, I love doctors. I respect you. You have 10-minute appointments for us, and you do an amazing job. And I think the problem they had with me and with so many women is that I never had hot flushes. I didn't have night sweats. I was still having periods. So you can see why, without sort of asking about the psychological symptoms, that so many of us were misdiagnosed, rightly or wrongly.
Absolutely. It's a hard diagnosis to make, especially in younger women. So, they might be 40, 41, 42, and they've got palpitations and they're not sleeping, and they've got a young family and a stressful job and COVID and elderly parents, and so many things feed into that mix, don't they? It can be really hard to kind of tease out what exactly is going on.
Exactly. So, I mean, and you described yourself as a shell of a woman, Katie, because I think that's the most scary bit, isn't it? Feeling that you're not yourself, and that you've got brain fog, and that you're not capable of stuff, and that feeling about, I can't go to work because I'm going to do something terrible, or it's just very, very scary, and for competent women, really very, very tricky. So we've dealt with a lot of common symptoms. I personally find that often the symptom that people miss is the poor sleep. And I will say to a woman, after she's told me about whatever she's concerned about, I said, what's your sleep pattern like? And she always says to me, how did you guess? Because actually, it really is very important, isn't it? If it's 4 o'clock in the morning and you can't sleep, and you're not going to feel any better now until 10 o'clock that night or 11 o'clock that night. So it's awful. So the common symptoms, what do you suggest, both of you? You can take it in turns, please. How should we be recognizing the symptoms? What should we be warning women to look out for? We've agreed that it's very variable. Not everybody has hot flushes. I personally had so much joint pain. I thought I was getting juvenile arthritis, except I wasn't juvenile, but it wasn't quite that. But I had so much joint pain. I never had a hot flush, but the joints were awful. And anytime I come off my HRT, I'm like a cranky old thing, and everything seizes up. So everyone's very different. And Katie was saying she didn't have hot flushes, but she had this awful feeling of not being able to cope. So, Naomi, what do you suggest that we should be flagging up for women in this Let's Chat Menopause week? And this new campaign, we really want to encourage them to be understanding what might be going on in their own bodies.
I think it's having an awareness of all of the symptoms. So really, if you are experiencing anything new that you can't pinpoint as being something in particular, say, it's not gastroenteritis because you've eaten a dodgy curry or something, then having it on your radar. So, there are lots of things that can happen that are not the perimenopause and menopause in your 40s and 50s. But if it's not something that is obvious, then just having that radar for yourself, for your friends, for your relatives, and knowing what those atypical symptoms are. And I think if we educate everybody, which is going to be a challenge, but we're getting there. So if everybody knows about the menopause, from children to older people, men, women, everyone, then even if you don't recognize it yourself, the chances are someone will be able to recognize it in you. And it might be a doctor, but it might equally be, you know, a colleague or a friend or a husband, and it's just awareness, isn't it? If people have that menopause radar out, and we know what the menopause is, and we know that there are things that can be done about it, then I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, and what I've created, and so many doctors have one as well, is a symptom checklist. And I mean, although it says 34 symptoms, actually there's probably more like 50 or even 100. And you know, because our team are managing a 25,000 strong Facebook group day in, day out, we recommend they download and print off a symptom checklist. They read, we've got an article on how, you know, what is menopause, which is obviously what Naomi's talking about. We've got an article for men to understand what's happening, because it's really important to include men in the conversation, and to be as prepared as you can before your doctor's appointment. Because actually, I'm sure, Naomi, you'll agree with me, but doctors are delighted when you come and an informed woman comes and says, look, I've got this symptom checklist, I'm feeling all these things, you know, I'm 40 to 55, do you think it could be this? And I think, you know, if simple things like that are really, really effective. So, you know, I would just advise anyone to, you know, start with that, because just having that list in front of you, you'll suddenly, you can sort of tick, tick, tick and think, okay.
Any drops?
Yes.
Yes, shall we turn now a little bit towards hormone replacement therapy? Now, I'm keen to emphasize to everybody who's joined us today that it's not the answer for everybody, but I think that, if I may say, Naomi, that on behalf of general practitioners, I think that they've had a rough deal, because they've been told repeatedly in the past that it's dangerous, it gives women breast cancer, it causes all sorts of problems. And I think it's important for us to summarize here that the main reports that came out in 2002 and 2003, the Million Women study, and the other one, I can't remember what it's called now, WHI, the Women's Health Initiative, were analysed, and the analysis has since been questioned, and we now recognise that they were much older women who'd been started off on things. And I think it's really important to say as well that still the MHRA, the Medical Healthcare Devices Regulatory Agency, still send out reports. And if you are a GP, Naomi, I think that when you put on HRT onto your electronic prescribing thing, an alert comes up, doesn't it? So I think that's the real problem that we need to try and say. So I'm not saying that you should be taking it without consideration, but I think it's really important for any woman who's been told that she can't have HRT because it increases her risk of breast cancer to understand what the figures are. So if we were to look at the numbers involved, it's a small increase in the number of cases of early breast cancer, but because most women on hormone replacement are being screened and followed up, there is no increase in the number of deaths from breast cancer in women taking HRT. And I just want to emphasize that, because I think it's a really, really important point. So I often say to my team at Wellbeing, I'm not planning to live forever, but I want to live very well, or as well as I can whilst I'm alive. But there is no increase in death from breast cancer from taking HRT. So HRT, what would your recommendations, Naomi, be? I come to see you with my achy joints. There's a lot of comments about joints here I think I've triggered off, and my bad mood. My daughters, my young teenage daughters at the time, saying, "Oh God, Mum, you're so scary at the moment." And that's what made me think, oh, I've got to do something about this. I mean, here I am, a reproductive endocrine gynecologist, and I didn't even recognize my own symptoms until one of my daughters said, "Oh, you're so scary." It was shocking. It was really shocking. So just tell us how you would tackle me if I came in, and what you'd suggest I would have, and then perhaps we can then talk about the various different preparations and modes of delivery.
So HRT is hormone replacement therapy, and what we try and do is to give back the hormones that are now either gone or fluctuating and kind of basically on their way out, aren't they? And so the first hormone that we talk about replacing is estrogen. And it is generally the way I prefer to give it, which is the safest way of giving it, is through the skin. and there are different options depending on what a woman prefers. So there's gels and patches and sprays, and each of them have their own advantages and disadvantages and availability at the time. And so you just have a conversation about what your preference might be, and if it's the right thing for you, and then make a decision, try that out. And sometimes it works, and sometimes you might make adjustments or try a different product. And then so alongside that, if you have a uterus, then you have a lining of the uterus, which is called the endometrium, and we need to protect that from using additional estrogen. And there's two main ways that I like to give that progesterone, either in the form of something called Utrogestan, which is a body identical progesterone, or a really convenient way is a Mirena coil. If you can get through the 20 minutes of having it fitted, then it can be brilliant, because you can then forget about it for 5 years. So those are the two main ways that I would deliver progesterone. And then there's the third hormone, testosterone, which we sometimes give. It's an area of debate. At the moment, the guidelines are that you give testosterone if you've got a woman who's had adequate estrogen levels replaced, but is still suffering from a distressingly low libido. There is debate about whether or not it helps with other things as well, including get up and go, energy, joie de vivre, and joint pains and metabolism. And we sometimes use that as well, but that can be harder because there is no female product licensed for use on the NHS at the moment. The only product that's licensed is a special license, and it's only available privately. So that's the hormones in a nutshell. And those would be the hormones that you would use systemically for kind of systemic treatment. And there's also topical estrogens, which are brilliant, massively underused, I think. And we use creams, gels, pessaries, and they are localized estrogen that target urogenital symptoms. So that is going for a wee, loads, getting up in the night needing a wee, vaginal dryness and soreness. And they are incredibly safe. The only real downside to them is there can be a bit of a faff, but I think they are really underused, and can be a brilliant tool.
Lovely, thank you. Katie, did you want to add anything in? And then I'm going to pick up some of the questions about testosterone and progesterone and HRT and things. Katie.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm so passionate about sort of getting rid of all this misinformation, especially with the sort of breast cancer and HRT story, obviously, but my father would tell us these stories of these poor women who had gone through breast cancer and were thrown into menopause, whether it's surgical or chemical menopause, and the way they were suffering was absolutely horrendous. So it's really important that women get the right information. And the other thing to say is that actually the highest rate of sort of female death, if you like, in this country, it is not breast cancer. It's things like heart disease, Alzheimer's, osteoporosis, and I can't remember what the other one is now, dementia. And so there are, obviously, as you said, HRT isn't for everyone, but there are lots of health benefits. Osteoporosis, has been proven. So I just don't want women to be scared, and I want them to get the right information out there. And so many women come to our Facebook group, and they often post anonymously, terrified of the vaginal dryness. Their relationships have broken up. They're often told it's thrush. They don't want intercourse, so the marriages break down. And actually, as you've said, vaginal estrogen, it's very safe. And we just want to sort of break down these taboos and for women to realise there are things that can be done. And just for complete transparency, I ended up, by the way, having a hysterectomy because of this very heavy bleeding. So I only now need estrogen, as Naomi was saying, the progesterone is to protect the womb lining. So just for anyone else that perhaps is perhaps going to be having a hysterectomy, hopefully not, that's obviously something to be aware of, because a lot of women come to the group who've been given really bad advice, and they're having estrogen with a womb, but they're not having progesterone. So it's just really important to see a menopause specialist and go to trusted sources.
Lovely, thank you very much. So there's a question here about, is the progesterone in with the estrogen? Well, it depends what you're taking. So if you're taking tablets, then often it's a combined preparation of the two, and you get if you like, a blister packet of pills, and sometimes there's 2 pills for the latter part. When the extra progesterone in other preparations, it's all put into the same tablet, and you don't need to worry about that. When it comes to patches as well, you can, there are some patches that are delivering both, or you could have progesterone and estrogen patches, or you can take them as an oral preparation, as Naomi was saying. I like Nutrigestan because it tends to make it, I think for some women it's a little bit soporific, so if you take it last thing at night, it often helps with the sleep. That's reassuring for them. Or as you said, the Mirena coil is an incredible boon. I mean, in fact, it's transformed gynecology, the Mirena coil, hasn't it? I mean, all these women who don't now have to have major procedures to stop their heavy bleeding. So lots of comments again about testosterone. And so thank you for emphasizing that it's not licensed. And there's a question about, well, what are we all doing about that? Well, using my ambassador role, I'm going to see what I can do about the testosterone. I think it's interesting. I think it's, you know, there's been so much anti-HRT for such a long period of time. And as I've said to several health secretaries in succession, you know, it's a funny old thing, isn't it? HRT and the contraceptive pill. Now, why aren't they just available over the counter? Because, you know, there aren't that many people for whom they're contraindicated. And yet you can go and buy Viagra. It's on the shelf. And that was released on general release, as they call it, general sales, within a year of getting the license. Just extraordinary, whereas the pill and HRT have been researched incredibly well. So there's a question about a lady who had a clot, a blood clot or a thrombosis post-COVID, and is there any hope for her having HRT? Well, my suggestion is that you go and book an appointment with your GP and talk to them about it, because there is no evidence that transdermal, so patches or gels, increases the risk of thrombosis. So I think that if you have had a thrombosis, you're at far greater risk if you're overweight, of that being a cause of the increased risk of thrombosis. So go and talk to your doctor about it in the round, so to speak, about all the pros and cons, and remembering that. And coming back to my point about breast cancer, and the risks of HRT and estrogen, what we discovered after probing into the WHI and the Million Women study in much greater detail was that your risks of getting breast cancer are far, far greater if you're overweight than they are taking HRT or estrogen. So important points to reckon. So I'm going to ask Lena to push up any ones that I've missed out that are very common that are coming. There are quite a few questions here about the male menopause. Naomi, would you like to make any comments about that?
We were talking about this yesterday. I mean, I think there is some evidence to suggest that men do have dwindling hormone levels as they get older, but not in the same way and the same predictability as with women. So we know that all women will stop having their periods by the time they are in their late 50s, and that they will no longer be able to have babies, whereas that doesn't happen with men. And that's really about the extent of my expertise. It's not my field, but I think that there probably is something that happens, but not quite as pronounced as in women.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's common. Now there's a question here about what is the well-being of women doing for women in different ethnic groups or patriarchal societies where menopause may be even more taboo? What an excellent question. And it allows me to say we're doing an awful lot, actually, because not just for menopause, we've got a researcher up in the Luton and Bedfordshire area who's working with women in ethnic groups who find it difficult to access antenatal care. We've got Nigat Arif, Dr. Arif, she's on Good Morning TV, and she's one of our ambassadors, and she's absolutely fantastic, a real powerhouse of information for women, and she's looking specifically at Muslim women in small communities where they just don't know what the menopause is. Nigat tells me that when she was talking to her mum about it the first time when she was a teenager, she said to her mum, you know, did you have hot flushes? And her mother who comes from Pakistan originally, said, oh, no, that's what you have in places like Bangladesh and Pakistan. That's what a hot flush is. It's very cold here. So now I'm not saying that that's necessarily the right answer, but it's very interesting how in different societies and different cultures, even though they're living in this country now, they will have different views about it, may not be aware of it. So yes, we are doing things about it, that questioner. And please, log on to our website and see more information about that. Menopause and sex life questions. I think you just mentioned about low libido. Is there anything further you'd like to say? Because I see lots of women who found it very, very difficult to bring up the subject of vaginal dryness and soreness, or just not feeling like it and wishing that they could do something miraculous. And I prescribe quite a lot of Vagifem pessaries because it often helps women to sort of feel that their things are under control. But do you often prescribe topical estrogens as well as systemic, Naomi?
We ask about that in every consultation. We ask about vaginal symptoms and about libido. And yes, we do. I mean, so I think it depends on a personality of a woman as to whether you would give both at the same time. So I often say it depends. Are you someone that wants to try things sequentially, or do you just want everything chucking at it right away to try and get on top of everything? And then they tell you exactly what they want. But we often use, so I think that the statistics are that in about 70% of women, systemic estrogen, so using the patches, gels or sprays, will sort out any vaginal symptoms. But in the other 30%, they still need local estrogen. And it works. It really does. And
it's also particularly good for bladder symptoms, isn't it? When you've got urinary frequency and nocturia and irritability of their bladder, it really is very, very good.
And funny, you mentioned Dr. Arif. We did a live together, and she was saying that lubricants are also your best friend, and you should be using them daily. Like you would moisturize your own lips when you go outside. She says, just think of it in that way. Don't be embarrassed. It's awkward and it's taboo, but it's great to know. I think the thing about all these wonderful online communities is you don't feel you're alone, because often you sit there thinking, oh God, it's just me, there's something wrong with me. So yeah, just don't be shy, don't be embarrassed. I'm sure the doctors have heard everything and more.
Definitely. So and I think that's really is about changing the discussion and making it commonplace. So have a word about lifestyle changes and that we can make to improve things. There's some questions about yoga and exercise in the chat. So a couple of thoughts here, Naomi and then Katie, about lifestyle changes that can sometimes help with managing symptoms.
I think really, really important. I don't think that HRT on its own is not gonna sort everything out. It's taking a holistic view, but also it's looking at what women are doing initially as a form of self-medication. So I think we often get women coming to us who have become reliant on drinking half a bottle of wine to go to sleep because their sleep's been so poor, and then reliant on 2 strong coffees the following morning to wake themselves up because they've had a rubbish night's sleep, because they've either had rubbish sleep or they've drunk half a bottle of wine and sugar, and then feeling so exhausted that they can't exercise. And so it's about kind of unpicking all of those kind of self-medication type behaviors and pointing them out and then encouraging them to change them. And also the thought exercise is fantastic, but sometimes women think, well, that means running a marathon or doing a HIIT class, when they just can't even begin to, even walking the dog is an effort. And so it's just explaining to them that as soon as they start moving, then they will start to feel probably a bit better. And then that can lead into things that they can then, expand upon. And then there's things like yoga and Pilates, where you can find a group that might give you support. Headspace, there's a Headspace app that can help. So there's all sorts of different things that just, if you point women in the right direction, it's a kind of multi-pronged approach to changing behaviors, improving behaviors and lifestyle, and it all kind of feeds into just those subtle changes that in itself they're all small, but they lead to a much bigger improvement in the medium and long term.
Sorry.
Go on, please go.
No, I'm just so glad you brought this up. Naomi sort of hit the nail on the head. For me, the more depressed I got, the more I craved sugar, and then I would lie on a couch and self-medicate with eating very unhealthy food, and I put on 4 stone of weight. And then the heavier I got, the more I didn't want to go out, and the more I didn't want to go out, I wasn't moving, and you get into this horrible vicious circle, and then you lose self-confidence and you just feel awful. So it's kind of where you attack that circle. I mean, for me personally, I tried losing weight, I tried exercising to feel mentally better, and for me, HRT was the only thing that worked, you know, for my own personal circumstances. And once I cleared the brain fog and I felt joy again, then I couldn't wait to get out there, and I walked my dog, and I just wanted to eat better. And so, you know, sometimes for some people, losing the weight and eating better and exercise is enough, and meditating and yoga, mindfulness. For other people, you know, for me, it was the HRT first, and then I managed to, you know, lose all the weight and feel better. So I guess it's just where you attack. But no matter what, HRT will never just be the only thing. You know, it's for long-term health. We all need to be moving, eating well, and de-stressing. That's a big thing. Yes, reducing stress.
And I think weight-bearing exercise is really, really important, isn't it? Really is crucial, because the incidence, you know, the incidence of frailty and problems, if I was to have a fracture in the next 10 years, you know, my chances of getting back to full independence again actually start to go down quite dramatically. And I'm quite slim and quite active and quite healthy, I think. But it's amazing how quickly women can become frail. And it's a fact of life that women live for longer in terms of years, but they live many more years in poorer health compared to men. So I think there's lots of things that we can do to encourage our sisterhood to keep as active as possible, and weight-bearing exercise is really, really important. There's quite a few questions as well about menopause workplace pledge, and do you have a menopause policy at work? Well, yes, if you go onto the menopause, if you go onto the Wellbeing of Women website, you'll see what the pledge is all about. And it's all about having a policy at work and encouraging employers to think about this. It's not a massive, massive step. They don't have to commit to masses of things, but just to provide a space for women to be able to talk about things. I think Lena's just put up the menopause pledge campaign thing in the chat there, so you've got the website there which you can copy and paste into your browser, so it's all there. And I would say don't try and make it all up from scratch. There's plenty of menopause work policies, so just go and borrow one of the many that are on the internet, and adopt it, and spend your effort convincing everyone to follow it through. There's quite a few questions about what should you do if you're an HR director with your members of staff and things like that. And I think it's really, I mean, many of the women I talk to, not even expecting special treatment, they just want to be able to talk about it and explain that they need to have some time off in order to recuperate or whatever. And I think that's really important that we do that. I think one of the things that COVID's taught us all is that actually you can be more flexible in the way you employ people and how they do their work. And it doesn't mean that if they're not actually in the office that they're not being productive. Thoughts about that, Katie, and then Naomi, because I think that's quite important. It's a sort of a massive change of attitude, isn't it?
It is. It's hugely important from an economic point of view for businesses to get on board, because, you know, I think it's something like 1 in 5 women in employment now are women over 50, and we're at the sort of peak of our careers. You don't want to be losing us. And we do, you know, how we work with corporates is that we will start with something like this, just an awareness event. It breaks down taboos, it makes it easier to talk about. And then we make suggestions that, you know, a policy is great to have as long as everyone sort of knows it exists and understands how to roll it out. So having menopause ambassadors in the workplace, whereas, you know, for someone like me who went through if I had known there was someone I could talk to, and we would train up that menopause ambassador to know, you know, the right advice to give and to signpost them on to the right people. So it's just about opening the conversations, being aware, and it makes total, you know, business sense. And you know, I think it's fantastic, your pledge, because the more people that get on board, you're just going to retain, you know, your talent.
Yeah, exactly. And we can't afford to waste this talent. I mean, women are extraordinary. I mean, we're the only sex, well, there are only two, but we are the only sex that actually are capable of, of nurturing a baby and delivering it. How amazing. I've often thought, why it is that we don't just celebrate this and want to make it very easy for them to do that. But that's perhaps a campaign for another year. We'll stick to the menopause for just now. So my other question is, when do you think we should go and approach your GP if we're struggling with our symptoms? There's quite a few comments in the chat about, my GP's told me I can only have HRT for a year. Well, I'll put paid to that. There's no reason why you can't have HRT for longer than a year, as long as you're suitable for it and as long as it suits you. So I don't think that you need to be too concerned about that. And I think possibly rather than shouting at the GP if they've denied it to you or they say you can't have it for longer than a year, is to go and show them some of the data. The evidence that shows that it's perfectly okay to continue, and you can get some of that on the Wellbeing of Women website, and you can also get it on the NHS website as well. There's a big menopause group there now who are providing all sorts of information. Naomi, when do you think we should be approaching GPs if we're struggling? Should it be sooner, later, or somewhere in the middle?
I think as soon as your symptoms are impacting your quality of life, even if you might feel that they're only minor, different women have different perspective, have a different perspective on what is a minor or a major symptom. But if you've got vaginal soreness that actually makes sitting down quite uncomfortable, no, you're not having a heart attack, but it's still impacting your life. And I would say absolutely go and speak to your doctor about it, because these are the golden years, that you've got, you're at the peak of your career, you've got a young family, you've got lots and lots to enjoy. And why have the impact of symptoms on that enjoyment if you don't have to? That would be my opinion on it. It's not like there is a stop clock. So like you said, there is a fallacy that if you start HRT, you push a timer, which means that after 5 years the buzzer goes and you've got to stop. So it's not like that doesn't happen. You can take it for normally as long as the benefits outweigh the risks, and that can be for a long time. So if it's impacting on your life, then I would seek help, as soon as you can.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, thank you. Katie, any thoughts there?
Well, no, I totally agree with what Naomi's saying. As soon as it's impacting your life, don't waste 4 years like I did, but go as informed as you possibly can, so that you're saving time and you're never a nuisance. GPs, that's what they're there for, and they want to help if they can. So go as sooner rather than later.
Thank you. There's a point here about it'd be great if all GPs were trained in the menopause. This would really help. Well, the good news is that Wellbeing of Women have invested in giving the NHS England quite a tidy sum of money to appoint a very, very experienced clinicians who are going to be running or delivering a very specialised training course that will be possible for people to access online, so that it's easy. You don't have to go off and take time off and things like that. So I think there are things that are happening there, and you'll be aware of the fact that the Women's Health Strategy is really advocating to develop women's health hubs. And when I say health hubs, they don't necessarily need to be a place or a building. They're actually more of a concept or an attitude of mind, that we actually ensure that those clinicians that are really interested in women's health are able to provide women with really holistic services. So one of the things I'm really trying to achieve as ambassador is to get the DH and NHS England to appreciate that, Naomi doesn't want to come and go to 4 different doctors to get all of her routine maintenance stuff done, her smear and her HRT or her contraception or her heavy periods or whatever sorted out. She wants to go to one place, and preferably she wants to get her mammogram done and her DEXA scan if that's the age group she's in. So I think we've just got to really, really push for that. And I think it's really important that we do sort of talk about how important it is to have places where women can go to for those investigations, but also perhaps join virtual consultations when they're trying to sort of triage what their symptoms are and what would be helpful, because not everyone needs to have all those things. But I think it's thinking about different models to offer women and different models to deliver care. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that. So Katie, what would you say if somebody had offered you a women's health hub? Would that have been attractive to you?
I mean, what you've just said is music to my ears, and I'm actually quite emotional, actually, because, you know, we've been bashing our head. We feel like we've been bashing our heads against a wall for the last 6 years, and it's very frustrating, and change takes time. So hearing, you know, from the horse's mouth that these plans are in place, I'm so happy about it. I mean, we've given evidence to the Women's Health Strategy and the Menopause APPG last year, and it's just good to know that, you know, our voices are being heard. And yes, 100%, I would love a one-shop stop, you know, because people give up so much time. We've got kids and families and jobs, and I just want to go to one place. I would like a sort of just even a leaflet posted through the door, or an email age 40 and 45 and 50 with a symptom checklist, and with some advice, you know, what is perimenopause, something like that, very simple. Fabulous. You've made me a very happy lady hearing that, and yes, I would go.
Well, I think that's good. I'm glad that made you happy. Now we've got to create the reality of it, haven't
Yes.
we? We're all on no money, but we will. I'm quite determined. I mean, it's really very interesting as well, because we're talking about the menopause as being this sort of watershed time. But of course, if we get that right, we're going to get so much else right. And as I often say to those civil servants who I get to listen to me occasionally, you know, if we talk to lots of people on the platform today and say, well, what do you think you're going to die of? Most women will say cancer, and they're wrong. You know, almost all of us are going to die of heart disease or the complications of osteoporosis and frailty, or a combination of all of them. And we can do so much if we tackle the menopausal years, or the post-reproductive years, let's call them, in a positive way. I think it's really, really so important, because we could do so much more. So we're not going to make women live forever, but we're going to actually postpone the preventable complications until a bit later on, and leave them in better health for that time. So I think that's really very important. So how do you feel, Naomi? You're obviously a menopause expert, and that's what you, I'm sure, spend a lot of your time doing. But how are we going to convince the naysayers? Because I've had quite a few people from the Royal College of GPs saying, you're going to take away all the women's health stuff and put them in hubs, and and we can't do it, and we can't manage. How am I going to persuade them that this is benefiting everybody?
I mean, it's hard to convince people that don't want to be convinced, but I think it really is. And when we see that a lot, that just because something is now being talked about, there's automatically the group of people that just dig their heels in and say, well, you're just talking about it because it's fashionable. But I think that the strength of the voice that is now behind the menopause is so convincing that really it can't be ignored. And I'm hoping that is going to be what carries this forwards, because it affects every single woman to a greater or a lesser degree, and that's just got to count for so much, hasn't it? Because and the amount of suffering that we've witnessed is just, and it's largely avoidable, completely avoidable. And I think anybody that ignores that is utterly unreasonable, to be honest. They really are.
And we come back to one of the points I was saying at the beginning in my introduction, that this strange thing about all this is that it's entirely predictable that this is going to happen. So I think we've just got to say to everyone, just take your glasses off, or your blinkers, and just look at what's in front of you. This is going to happen.
And also, sorry to interrupt, and also we've got to look at all-cause mortality. I mean, I did an amazing interview, and it's free if anyone wants to watch this week, with a Professor Sarrell, who's from Yale, who's a psychiatrist and heart specialist, and his interview blew me away. And when people like that realise that actually we're gonna save lives, because women will stop dying from heart disease and hopefully dementia and osteoporosis. Actually, to me it's not rocket science. It's vital. We've got to change that narrative. It doesn't belong in this century anymore.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to get shouted at in a moment because we've only got 1 minute left and I'm getting frantic messages on my feed saying 2 minutes left, 2 minutes left, because they know that once I get started, I can't stop. So I'm now going to have the great pleasure of thanking our two fabulous speakers, Katie Taylor and Naomi Potter, for giving us their time today and their insight and their wisdom and their knowledge. It's been really super. Thank you so much indeed for coming this week and helping us to launch our Let's Chat Menopause campaign. And to everybody on the platform, please keep in touch with us. Please go onto the Wellbeing of Women website, get yourself that menopause workplace pledge, wave it in front of your employer, or if you're an employer, you make sure your employees have got it all for them, and keep in touch with us, because this is the one, the menopause is the first of many things that we're going to be championing over the next couple of years. So next time we're going to be about Let's Chat periods, and then we've got to do something with adolescents as well in the future. So please keep in touch. It's been lovely to see you. Thank you for everybody on the platform. Thousands of questions. It's been absolutely wonderfully interactive. So ladies, Katie and Naomi, you've really triggered off a lot of response here. So I really do thank you on behalf of the charity, and look forward to welcoming you back in the future. And lastly, thank you to Lena and Laura for hosting us and keeping us. And I tried to keep to time, but I didn't quite manage it. So thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.